What's up, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to The Standard. Today we have Travis Poulson, one of my performance coaches here at Offthefield. He was originally an AT with the Boise State Broncos and with the Indianapolis Colts. We're super lucky to have him. We're going to go through the ACL return to play process and navigating that communication. So, man, I don't even think I ever really asked you, but why'd you want to become an athletic trainer? I mean, that was what you were doing before us. You know, what brought you to that?
Kind of a long road, similar to a lot of people. When I was, I wanted to be a physical therapist. So like in middle school, wanted to be a PT. That kind of happened from having to do some PT with like a weird, it wasn't really even an injury. Like I had a weird infection that kind of shut me down, put me in the hospital for a couple weeks.
From playing on the O-line?
No, that had nothing to do with playing O-line. I was playing O-line at the time. But no, after going through a little bit of the rehab process and doing some PT, I did think that's kind of the route I wanted to take. Learning more about PT and kind of the typical like patient population, the typical setting for a PT. I kind of drew myself away from it and knew that I wanted to be a little bit more involved in the sports scene, working directly with athletes. Started learning a little bit more about athletic training, kind of what it entailed, kind of what the average day looked like, I guess, as far as the job goes. And then really kind of went full force at that, went to school for it, kind of set out initially on my career as wanting to work as an athletic trainer in the team sports setting. And yeah, that's initially kind of how I started with wanting to go down the athletic training route.
And then when you started, what was your work path? What was your journey there?
Yeah, so went to school at College, which is a little D3 school in Iowa. We always joke around about that. But yeah, went to school for athletic training and then also got my degree in kinesiology and then kind of took the strength and conditioning route as well. After graduation, went full force on the athletic training side of things. So kind of the typical route. It's changed a little bit now with some changes in the profession as far as the education goes, but I had a bachelor's degree and knew that to get a position that someday I wanted to have my master's, kind of needed to have my master's. So the typical route to do that was to go, be a graduate assistant at a school, get your master's paid for, hopefully, and then get a couple years of work experience. And I knew that I wanted to work in the football setting. Ideally wanted to work with a Division I team to kind of build the resume a little bit, show that I had worked with some higher level athletes. Applied to a few different schools, ended up getting a spot with Boise State, which was awesome. So that's initially how I came to Boise, and that started right after I graduated. So I think it was like June of 2019. I jumped on the staff with them, started classes. That took me 2 years. So got my master's from Boise State. I got 2 years of work experience working on the athletic training staff with the football team at BSU. And then after that, went and took a seasonal spot with the Colts for a couple years.
Awesome. And then you were with the Colts for a while and doing good there. What made you want to transition to a performance coach? Like, how did we really start that combo?
Honestly, like that transition, I'm kind of lucky. Like it happened a little bit naturally just with reaching out to you and having a role where we could, kind of figure out how to start the performance side of things. I always had interest in it. So, from the time I was in high school, I loved working out, loved the weight room, liked the process of it, had some really good experiences with strength coaches, especially in college. Like Coach Walter at College was like really influential on me as an athlete. Loved the weight room, liked grinding. So I kind of knew like strength and conditioning specifically was something that I always had a passion in, especially like after I was done being an athlete, then like lifting weights and getting after it in the weight room became a little bit more of a hobby. So I wanted to try to find a way to blend that into my career as well. And it just like, it's kind of tough. Like career-wise, sometimes you go down one path and you're kind of full force down that path and it takes you a little ways away from kind of the other side of things. So, I looked at where I was at, when I was with the Colts, and there was a lot of different things that went into it, but loved the athletic training side of things, really liked working with the team, liked everything that I did as an athletic trainer. But I also knew that, I had a lot of interest in the sports performance side of things, knew that there was a lot of knowledge that I didn't have, and I think there's still a lot of knowledge that I'm gaining as I do this and will continue for years. But just when you look at overall human performance, athlete performance, not only from the medical side where I had some experience, but I knew kind of the performance side was like I felt for myself where I could, branch out a little bit and really kind of take off and and try to expand just on what I can do as a professional and kind of as a career.
Yeah, well, that blend from your, the training side to now under performance has been awesome for us, man. We've been lucky. When you were with the Colts or with Boise State, I got to ask, and I really asked you, what's one of the craziest injuries you've ever had or you've ever seen or had to deal with,
Yeah, I've been kind of
some wild story.
I've been kind of fortunate. I feel like as far as like crazy injuries on the field, I've been pretty fortunate. Like there wasn't anything that was super catastrophic, not anything that was like a crazy emergency. I've got a lot of friends that have had probably crazier stories than I have. One of just like the craziest stories. So when I was with the Colts, had a defensive end that tore his patellar tendon, and it was on Halloween of my first season, which doesn't really have, that much of an effect on the story until a year later. So patellar tendon, pretty serious injury. It's close to a 12-month recovery. We got him back. He was playing really good, got a contract extension. It was awesome. Goes out on October 31st the next year and tears his patellar tendon on the other side. So just kind of like, not that that's a crazy injury, but just a freak circumstance. You hate seeing something like that.
Was he playing football
happen.
or?
Yeah. It was the both of them were during a game. But some like as an athletic trainer, some of the crazier stories are really like the things that happen to athletes outside of the sport, and then they, either they wander into the training room with this odd injury, and you kind of got to get it out of them how it happened, or just freak circumstances that happen outside of sport. Like I was at BSU, kid shattered his leg skiing, so that still kind of falls under what you're doing, and you're still in charge of the rehab and everything. So there's always some interesting things, but yeah.
We're still working with him now, right?
No doubt.
Yep. Andy Peters.
For sure, yeah.
Shattered that leg again.
One.
Walk me through, the NFL, people talk, one of the highest levels you could possibly be at. Walk me through like that return to play process on how it worked with the training staff, the coaches, the strength staff, even there, maybe some front office influence and stuff like that too, as far as, where they're at on the payroll and the cap space or their contract or wherever they're at with that. Somebody hurts themselves, like a tradition, let's say, a hamstring tear. Mm-hmm. How does that work, and then what's that process look like getting them back on the field?
No, obviously, just like you mentioned, there is so much that goes into it, right? So, like, we could take this a lot of different ways to try to be somewhat, like, brief with it or kind of summarize. An athlete goes down with an injury. Athletic training is kind of the first line of defense, right? So, they evaluate the injury, kind of get a little baseline check on what they think it is. At that level, you're probably getting imaging on about everything. So you kind of organize getting imaging taken. We'll make sure they see one of the team docs, usually that day. There's a at that level, like since it is such a business, there's so much going on behind the scenes. Communication between the athletic trainers and the coaching staff and the performance side. Then you've got the team physicians. So team docs were coming into the building. If it wasn't every day, every other day in season, so they're taking a look at them. But yeah, athlete gets hurt. The team is obligated to provide the care for the athlete. So if that's something surgically, they're probably getting in for surgery and having that thing operated on as quick as they can, and then as soon as they can after injury, really like day one post-op, you're starting a rehab process, and it's a full-time thing. For the player, it's especially for those guys that are still on contract. When you're getting close to being on a contract year or you're on a contract year, things get a little bit complicated, and I can talk about that, especially like in the off season, things get really complicated. But as far as that goes, it's like it's their job, and those guys know it. Like they're professionals, they're at that level for a reason. But it's 6-7 days a week of rehab in the training room. There's not a ton of situations where a guy is outsourced for any sort of care, at least with the Colts. Now, I can't speak for the other 31 teams. There might be a different way that other teams do it. But for the most part, we took care of everything we could in-house. There was a couple like situations where maybe if it was a practice squad guy that wasn't on contract, he would outsource for PT. But for the most part, we took care of everything in-house. And, yeah, really from like day one after the injury up until they're cleared, and then usually for a little while afterwards, we're taking care of things from a maintenance standpoint, but quite the process. I don't know if I really answered the question
what do you
you're looking for.
What do you think is the biggest difference that you see from the NFL, from the Division I, even from the high school level you see now? What do you think separates them there?
Yeah, I guess so. Like, we'll start at the top with the NFL. So, like I said, with it being such a business, like a lot of dollars at stake, and they take it very seriously. So everything is pretty much accounted for. Like, for instance, in-season roster for an NFL team's 53 guys, and then with the COVID rules, they kind of changed the practice squad limits, but that's anywhere from like 10 to 16 guys, right? So let's just say ballpark like 70 dudes are on the roster. For the Colts, we had 5 athletic trainers, 1 PT, and then anywhere from 4 to 6 people that had the seasonal position. So you're looking at 10 to 11 hands that are there to work on people. So if you divide those 10 sets of hands up into 53 active guys and 10 practice squad players or whatever the numbers are, that there's quite a bit of care available for these guys. And like the Colts philosophy was very much like, hey, we're here. We're here 7 days a week. We want you guys to utilize our care.
Sweet.
Like they kind of like we honestly said like, hey, wear us out, right? Because we know at some point they're either going to utilize us or they're going to go outside, and we would rather have a little bit of a pulse on the situation, not let things creep up on us that way. So we were doing everything from in-season maintenance on guys to rehab cases, kind of all across the board, and utilize some other things. Like we had a chiro come in a couple times a week, MAT, ART. So we would outsource and we'd bring them into the building to help us out, which those hands were extremely valuable to us as well. But yeah, I mean, big picture-wise, like from start to finish, any injury, whether it's maintenance, something acute, we're pretty much taking care of it.
What about the time? So I remember you telling me, might have been like a couple days ago, but if you had somebody with an ACL, and this is where I feel like this conversation might lead, but you had somebody with an ACL, you would see them for 2 to 4 hours a day, every
100%,
day.
Every single day.
Every day.
Every day. And that, so I never really finished answering your first question. So that's the biggest difference, right? Like at the NFL level, so I was in the training room working 7 days a week, right? And the hours that were in there, the hours that were available is kind of based around the guy's schedule. But yeah, let's say a guy goes down with an ACL, right? From the first day that he tears his ACL, probably, let's say he tears it at practice, tears it at a game, he's doing an hour of treatment in the training room immediately after, right? And we're trying to take care of as many things as we can before this guy ever even has surgery. Reduce swelling, modify pain, try to make sure that quad is still functioning in some form, work on whatever range of motion we can get before he goes under, and then immediately after surgery, we've got him as well. So, we're doing everything from cleaning up the wound in those first couple days to taking the stitches out, seeing him every single day. And yeah, I mean, it's hours of work. So like, that's where like the process of rehabbing an ACL for the athlete or everyone else involved is not easy, or, it's not really a quick process by any means. A guy's doing probably, like you said, 2 to 3 hours of rehab every single day for 6 to 7 days a week. And that's the biggest difference at that level versus even when I was at BSU, and especially like Division III or high school, you start to go down the levels. It's just like the frequency that you're doing rehab and that you're doing some form of care for the player at the NFL is so high. And that alone, regardless of what you're doing for rehab, like that's going to make a night and day difference.
Yeah. And I think that's what we need to solve. And I think we're trying to do like to where, how do we treat rehab like training?
100%.
You know what I mean? All the time, which I think that when they're in with us, we are doing that. But how do we get them to do the things outside of us? Because it is resources, because we are cash-based, because it is like that. You know what I mean? It's tricky, but that's the solution we're solving. I feel like anytime that we've seen it work, or I've seen it work, it's like when somebody's putting in the work, especially when they're not with us. Usually when somebody's with us, they're killing it. But there's only so much time they can be with us. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And that's what we're gonna figure out. That's the puzzle.
No, I mean, we're talking about it every single week, right? Yeah. Like, how can we get kids in here more frequently? How can we
control what they're doing outside
of here? Build plans that are, doable and manageable for them outside. Whether it's utilizing some help at the high school or doing something at the Y outside of here. Like, we understand that people can't be in here maybe every single day, but I mean, I think the results show, right? Like, if we've got an ACL kid, and we've got them right now, if they're in here 4 to 5 days a week opposed to 2 to 3, the difference is there. Whether they're at 5 months, 9 months, like wherever they're at in the process, the higher the frequency is of care, rehab, and training, the better the results are.
Yeah, and I think and this is what I want to talk to you about too, but I think the communication, when the more communication we have with their therapist and their coach and their parent, usually what we have, and the more buy-in we get from that athlete and from the parent and the whole staff, to where it's like we're working together and it's not like, hey, your program versus our program, you know what I mean? And even with the surgeon, you know, I think that's where we're winning. You know, you being on a bunch of different training staffs and that I've always had to, you know, work with the strength staffs and then work with the coaching staffs and then work with the doctors, you know what I mean? Where do they kind of stand in the hierarchy, and give me some examples of like some of the staffs that you had of like, what do you think, and this is what you and I need to figure out, like what are the patterns that you've seen when they've really worked well together and where times they haven't worked well together? Because everybody at that level is probably skilled at what they do, but sometimes it just doesn't work because of different things, you know what I mean? Like when you saw some of the best ways or best teams that you've ever been a part of, and I'm not talking about the actual athletic team, but the support staff, the support team, you know, what were some of the best patterns you've seen from some of those teams you've been a part of?
I think the first thing, and you already just mentioned it with communication, like number one, first and foremost, is communication. I think if you can communicate effectively at a high level and communicate frequently, that's going to make the biggest difference, right? So I think that's one of the things, like I saw at the Colts working there for 2 years, they were extremely good at that, right? And I think every single day, whether it was us as a training staff, we sat down for 30 to 45 minutes and ran an injury report, right? Whether that was 5 guys that we were working with in the off season or 30 guys that were on the injury report for a regular season. We're talking about every single name on the list, what they're doing outside of our room, what the surgeon's thinking, what the most recent doc visit is.
Was that just your training staff, or was the strength staff involved in that, or anybody else?
For the training room, it was just the training staff, right? Just the training room. So that was everyone from the full-time to us as like seasonals, and you know, we kind of acted as full-times for the 2 years that we were there. There was some things like higher level that we probably weren't really involved in. But as far as that meeting every single day, that happened in our room. Outside of our room, our head and then our director of sports medicine, they both reported to the entire coaching staff every morning, like a full injury report. You know, this is what these guys are working through. This is the status. Here's the next step. And then also, so that meeting really happened twice per day. So they would start the morning, kind of a debrief of the day prior, because there's a lot of treatment and stuff that goes on after that initial meeting. But they would start the morning with a meeting. They would go through practice, treatments, all of that. They would have another meeting later on, and the performance staff is included in on that with the coaches. So 2 meetings a day outside of our room and then 1 meeting inside of our room. So a ton of communication every single day. We did similar at BSU, I'll be honest, with just a number that we had staff-wise. You know, we had 4 people when I worked there working with, you know, triple-digit numbers on the staff. The communication was still there, but I just think, you know, there were probably some areas where we could have been a little bit more effective with our communication across the board, especially between training room and strength and conditioning. But yeah, I think communication's the first thing that you got to be really good at. And then I think just having a mutual respect for the other professionals. And I think it's so easy to say, both communication and respect. It's tough. Sometimes egos get in the way. And I think at the end of the day, I truly believe, like we've had this conversation before, I do think that everyone that's working with these athletes wants the best for them, right? And I think everyone wants to have a positive impact on their recovery or on their performance, on the status of the athlete. But it's finding kind of the right combination of working with those other people, respecting what their role is, understanding kind of your role. And then I think there can be more crossover than people even allow sometimes. It's just a matter of like, that's got to be communicated ahead of time. That's got to be communicated throughout the process. So I do think communication and respect, and then kind of with the respect, it's like sometimes you got to put your ego aside, which is, it's notably tough. Like, and I struggle with it at times. I know the other sides of it struggle too, but you know, everything from physician to physical therapist, if they're going there, us as the performance side, you know, it's a constant working relationship. And then, like you said, like those different avenues, they got to be communicating the same thing to the athlete, which is tough. And to the parent, right? So if the athlete and parent are getting one message from the physician, a different message from the physical therapist, and then a third message from us, it's like, who do they trust? Who do they believe? So if we could get, you know, a little bit more of a cohesive message, a cohesive plan, kind of get on the same page, I think that's the biggest key to success there.
You know, now that you've been with performance and with us and the resources, how, you know, usually they'll come into us individually outside of all of those things. They're not even with their team. You know what I mean? what do you wish that you had now, and what's the struggles you're having with some of the athletes you have now? What are we struggling with? Not off the field in general. I'm just saying with our return to play process. Like what do we?
Yeah, I mean, like, what do I want, right? Even if this is unrealistic, I want to see a kid every single day. Now, I think we realize, like, right, we're a Monday through Friday for the most part. We got some Saturday availability, but we're probably not going to see an athlete every single day. But I think if we could see kids 4 to 5 times a week, that would be a big difference maker. I think seeing them earlier in the process would be huge, right? Yes. That's the hardest part. And I think, like, that's where I struggle the most. And I know we've had these conversations numerous times in the past, but and you know, we'll probably talk about this later, forget the timeline approach, but let's say a kid comes in at 7 months, right? We could get 3 different kids coming in at 7 months, and they're at 3 completely different stages. And the same could be true for a kid at 9 months or a kid wherever they're at, right? So that's extremely tough. And I think I think the biggest thing I would change is the 2 things, probably seeing kids on a higher frequency, and then seeing kids earlier in the process. And I know that's a lot to ask, but truthfully, I think those 2 things alone could solve a lot of issues and could help a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a huge part for me, it goes to your biggest point, and I think I said it earlier, is the communication. Like where I struggle with is, I mean, I've been in clinics where it's like, okay, coming off an ACL, and they're like, oh yeah, it's just a clean ACL and it's here and it's this. And me and the patient or athlete are like, well, there was a meniscectomy too. There's a meniscus issue too, right? And they're like, no, I don't think so. They look, oh yeah, there was a you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's not even the therapist's fault. It's that sometimes it's just back to back to backs, and they see them and they're here and they're, you know what I mean? To where it's like, or it's next guy up, which we've been getting performance too. You know what I mean? But to where they're told one thing, or they see somebody else, you know, oh, we can run it 6 months, oh, we can run it 3 months. Oh, we got cleared to play at 9 months, so it's going to take me a year. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's been the biggest issue, and I think that's the biggest thing that we've been lucky to learn from guys like Matt Jordan and you know, Jake dove deep on it. But I think for me, what I've really been trying to do with my athletes now in these types, so like even at C of I, like Cody is an absolute stud trainer, but it's the same thing. Like you said, resources super limited at NAI level. You know, 1 or 2 hands. Maya's assistant's awesome too, but on 100 guys plus other teams, you know,
it's hard.
And then they only get to see PT once a week because it's all that school can afford and different things like that. So it's like, okay, what is the milestone that they can achieve? It doesn't matter if it's a hamstring guy, knee guy, whatever it is, but it's like, okay, you have to be able to, this is it. Until you can do this, we don't do this. You know what I mean? Instead of just saying, hey, you can jog at 3 months and then knee blowing up. You know what I mean? And so that's where, I don't know if I have the solution. That's what we're trying to figure out, but to where if we can come up with some protocols that we work together with some of the surgeons that we've been talking with, you know, that we trust, with some of the therapists that we trust, you know, in state and across the country. But if we could put those together, you know what I mean, to where then it's like, okay, this is why we need to see you so frequently. This is why we need to see you. And again, if you can't see us that much because it's a financial issue, you know, let's see if we can solve that financial issue. Or it's like, when you're not with us, this is exactly what and why you're going to do it. And it might only be 2 things that you have to do on your own, but the difference is so crazy to me when you see, like, we have a few girls right now coming off ACLs, right? Mm-hmm. Similar parts, and you can tell how one of them, they're both great individuals, but one of them is just way more in tune with what she has to do every single day to the other one. You know what I mean? And it's the difference is not even close, right? And we see that all the time. I have 2 kids in college right now, the exact same thing. One of them is a freak athlete. He just thinks he's going to come back. The other one's not and has had to work at it, and his recovery has been 10 times faster. You know what I mean? He's passing all the tests. You know what I mean? His discrepancies between the injured leg and the non-injured leg are way closer than the other one, and the other one's frustrated because things have just come easy to him. You know what I mean? And I think if we could put it all in one place and we could see it, and it's never going to be black and white, right? No. You know, I mean, it's going to have the gray area, and it's never a linear path, which is also tough. Like, we're going to have times that step back, which suck, you know. But when they see those, you know what I mean, and you know that it's coming, I think it helps battle those roadblocks a lot easier, you know. So I think that's what, in an ideal world for me, it's like, could we see him as soon as possible?
Yep.
Could we see him every day or as much as we possibly can? You know what I mean? And then could we be on a protocol or a system, communication that everyone agrees on? The surgeon, the therapist, the performance staff, their coach, their parent. And and just know that it's a work in progress. Like, it's never like we're just going to eventually have one cookie cutter program.
No.
You know what I mean? Because I got guys on the Tommy John return to player throwing programs, you know what I mean, that they're doing the same Tommy John program that I did in 2007. You know what I mean? And like things have to change. You know what I mean? And there's people across the country that are doing phenomenal things. There's people in the state doing phenomenal things, but it's how do we put it all together that's where these young athletes and collegiate athletes operate like an NFL team, you know, or a premier soccer league team. You know what I mean? Maybe we won't ever have the same resources as them, but let's try to get as close as we possibly can.
For sure. And like you just said, I mean, it's a constant evolving process.
Yeah.
So the best people in the world at doing ACL rehab or whatever it is, they're constantly evolving. But at the same time, there's certain criteria that they're looking for. And that's the black and white part. Like how you get there, there's going to be a gray area. How fast you get there is going to be a little bit of a gray area. But the black and white is like, what are the staples that we're looking for? Like the absolute cut and dry, hey, you have to get X, Y, and Z in this acute phase in these first couple weeks, whatever it is, before we advance you any farther. And I think understanding that and kind of like we've talked about it so much, but like getting away from the classic timeline approach. I understand when you're building a protocol for the masses, I totally get the timeline, and you got to give people a little bit of an expectation.
Yeah.
But the problem is we can't say that, hey, no matter what, at 6 months you're going to be doing this. Like, we don't know. You know, there's so many steps in the process that have to lead to that. But if we can give them, hey, these are the 3 objectives that you have in this phase of rehab, and once you crush everything that we're going to put in front of you and you accomplish these things, then we can go on to the next step. I think that's where we're going to have success. And we've already seen a little bit of it here, you know, but it's a constantly evolving process.
And you know, on the performance side of things, because you've been on the rehab side of things too, what do you love about the performance side of things on the return to play side? You know what I mean? Like what aspect of what we do now is different, and you know, why do you think it's beneficial, and you know, why are you doing that?
So I think on the performance side of things, I think a lot of different things, right? Like I love the athletic training side of things as well. I think people are excited to come to the performance side of things. Like they walk in the door, right? We got a full 20 plus yards of turf. We got racks on both sides. Like they feel like they're in an athletic environment, right? They're doing similar things to the other kids around them. So they're doing a little bit more. And I think that's something that's missed sometimes on the rehab side of things. And I'm not trying to sidetrack too much, but like we've talked about it. I mean, part of the rehab process is tailoring things to the athlete. So like, yes, you have an ACL injury, right? We're going to focus on that knee, but we can't forget about the other leg or your upper half or your conditioning level. Like there's so many different things that go into it. And that's where like seeing people more frequently allows us to open doors to these other things that we have to work on. But on the performance side of things, I mean, one thing that I really like, and we've talked about it before, that I lacked and I'm still getting better at, but just dissecting movement. Trying to have people perfect movement, understand what I'm seeing, what I need to see out of the athlete. I think so often just with like the education that I had and kind of the processes that we took to rehab an athlete, a lot of it was kind of just assumed that people, once they went back to running, right, or they started jogging and they progressed to running and sprinting, that these things were going to come back to an athlete naturally. I mean, in our setting, half the time we're working with kids that have such a low training age that like they've never even mastered these skills or gotten close. So that's where things get tough. It's like, yes, we're coming back from an injury, but we're also trying to teach you how to move efficiently, move effectively, right? Do things in the proper manner. So like I enjoy that challenge on the performance side of things. I do think that that's where we're a little bit different. And I think that's where what we do might be looked at to others as you know, the different way of doing it. But to me, that's fun. I think the setting that the kids are in, the things that we're looking at, and then all the doors, all the different avenues that we can take kids through a training session is really cool. Yeah,
I think one of the biggest issues, right, with any athlete, I think if you know they're at the professional level, even you can't even say all Division I level, but you know, but high level athletes, it's like, you know, they have some sort of movement competency, right? You know what I mean? But when our kids, it's like they come in and like, oh man, that squat looks like shit. And well, they might not actually know how to squat. It might not be because of that injury. They don't even know what they're doing, or their run looks terrible, or their whatever. So it's fun, but it's also tricky. Like everything that you and I are reading or listening to, it's like on professional athletes or you know, older populations. You know what I mean? And that's luckily we've had some huge mentors helping us, but it's like, well, man, maybe that's just how they're moving, you know what I mean? Or maybe it's, you know what I mean, how much do we correct? How much do we do this, you know? And, you know, how important is the bilateral squat on an ACL? You know what I mean? How important are these benchmarks that they hit? You know what I mean? Are there other wins that we can get to help move the needle? You know what I mean? And it's tricky, you know what I mean?
And that's like we talk about the gray area, but that's like that. Those are all the different things that fall into that gray area. But when you're working with an NFL athlete, like those are some of the things that I probably took for granted, right? Like these guys are high level athletes that just have genetic capabilities of healing extremely well and progressing super well, and their training age is far advanced to a lot of the people that are in our setting, and that's no fault to the kids that walk in these doors. That's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
But it makes the process fun, right? It makes it enjoyable. I think there's a lot of different things that come through our doors, but it's awesome.
Yeah. Why do you think we having so many kids tear their ACLs? I've listened and read, and you hear the studies, but what do you think the issue is?
Yeah, I think, man, there's a lot of different things that go into it, right? I do think that like the frequency that kids are playing games. I mean, let's just use soccer as an example, right? So if a kid's specializing in soccer from a young age and playing soccer however many weekends per year, there's 52 weeks in a year. Let's say for 35 of them, they're playing soccer or something crazy, right? And they're practicing throughout the week, not getting a ton of time off or not really having any transition periods. I think the high level or I should say the high frequency of games and competitions and practices, not really getting any time to focus on appropriate strength levels, and then having that fatigue go into, a lot of those competitions and events. Let's say you play 3 games on a Saturday, 3 games on a Sunday afternoon, you're playing your 6th game of the weekend, you go to decelerate, go to cut, that muscle fatigue's kicking in, and all of a sudden now, you're pushing a ligament to the point where, it's not ready to go. And so I think a lot of that contributes to it.
So let me be devil's advocate to that. So where that's probably one of the most common things, like sports specialization, right? Like everybody's playing all year round.
Yeah.
And a lot of the old heads or whatever, would say, hey, we played all these different sports. We were just moving. We were doing different things. But I mean, like, we also need to be competent at movement, right? We also need to be the better at a task we are, the better we should be at that task to be able to perform it, right? They were still playing 3 to 4 different sports, so you would still have a fatigue. You're on arguably worse surfaces. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The studies have shown in the NFL, the turf has not caused. I mean, the injury rate is actually higher on the grass than it is on the turf, with Achilles and ACLs, right? Everybody thinks it's turf, and
right.
They're showing that it's not. You know what I mean? Maybe it's not the surfaces, but with the sports specialization, to me, if you're playing all these other sports and you're running around on a park, I mean, you're in a lot more unstable, variable environments. You know what I mean? Where you're all over the place. To me, that argument of only playing one thing, I get it. I understand, okay, you could be fatigued from there, but the argument of that you doing all these other things helps you prepare for these. Maybe on the mental side of things, like some side of the stuff that we don't understand, you know what I mean? That teaches some different spatial awareness and different things. And I've read good arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
But those ones are tough for me to figure out which ones are causing issues. One argument is lifestyle now, to where we are, whether we like it or not, it's said all the time, but like sitting in a chair. You know what I mean? So postural deviations and postural issues that we have now at a younger age, and sitting and here and then having a phone and then driving more, and us being in an environment like that instead of being up and moving around. You know what I mean? Those could cause issues too. Just like even just how that now, most of the time when you tear an ACL, your pelvis is or your spine's not in a neutral, solid position. Usually you're offset, or it's tucked underneath. You're in a bad position to where the quad can't stabilize and decelerate the knee, and then that's where you get the shearing. So like, okay, it could be postural from that too. You know what I mean? So I see that argument too. One of the most interesting ones to me that I'm thinking of it is we're almost more knowledgeable and way better at sports at a younger age than we used to be.
That was the point that I was going to bring up. I think youth sports are far advanced.
Way advanced.
To when we were playing sports as a kid, especially when our parents were playing sports as a kid. Like the demands on the youth athlete now compared to 10, 20, 30 years ago is night and day. So I do think that definitely plays a factor in it.
I I've read some stuff on it, not inconclusive. I don't know how you can make a study that would prove that, but to me, it's like, one, the knowledge they have, so the skills and the moves that they're making and the intensity that they're going, because whether it's true or not, they think they're getting looked at 11 years old, so the intent is way higher. In high school, they're way stronger, way more powerful than they used to be, to where maybe just like coming back from an ACL, where is the ligament ready at 6 months? Okay, you hacked the quad, you've passed every test, you look great, hypertrophy's there, strength's there, but is the ligament actually healed? Maybe at that younger age, their body, hasn't grown symmetrically, almost like on an injured leg. And again, this is just me just thinking, but just watching our athletes, it's like some of the guys that we have, and like just looking at their physique, they look like they're 22, but they're actually a 16-year-old body. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Maybe their body isn't ready to be able to run 22 and a half, 23 miles an hour and then be able to cut on that. You know what I mean? Maybe that's the issue. You know what I mean? That's where I think that we're having, I think the knowledge and the intent and then the skills that these kids have, I think that's more of the issue than the specialization. Now, when you specialize, you get better at the skills, so maybe that's what it is too. But I think there's arguments on all of them.
For sure. I mean, there's so many different factors that can go into it. I think back to what you just said, right? So take sports specialization out of it. Just the demands on the athlete from the sports side of things are elevating. They're getting higher. These kids are doing more advanced things at a younger age. And I think that's where, like, we see young kids come in all the time where completely understandable, but like the goal is to get faster or to be more agile or to jump higher. But one of the first things that we need to focus on is the strength side of things. These kids need to be able to produce more force in order to get faster, in order to slow down more effectively. So I think the skill side of sports has continued to elevate, which is awesome. I think that's where, like, on the performance side, that's where we try to have an effect. And I think it's been that way for a while, but like we've seen the trends and I think it's starting to come full circle now. So it's like, how can we have an effect on these kids from a young age, building some relative strength, building the ability to move in the appropriate ways and understand what they're doing when it comes to movement, and then start to apply that to the advanced sides of sport. Yeah.
I think, my next question was going to be, so how do we solve it? And I think the biggest thing you said there was the strength side of things. I think it's also movement, right? And that's what, why us as a staff meet twice a week, and we're trying to figure it out, and we're trying to pick anybody's brain that we possibly can pick, and trying to watch the best movement. Because to me, if you have the adequate strength, you know what I mean, and at least where you should be, you know what I mean, and then you move properly, I think that's going to be the best way to mitigate risk. I think the other one is, like, again, if trying to get somebody to not specialize in sport, to tell somebody, one, the kid loves basketball, two, parents played at a high level, kid has a chance to play at a high level, and then tell them, hey, you should be playing football and baseball too. Like, that's a tough argument, and one I don't want to have, and it's hard for me to argue against their argument, right? But for them, it's like, okay, how do we create some of the environments that we see in the sport? I don't think we can. Like a guy I got to listen to in Altus, I don't even know if I've talked to you about him. His name, I'm going to say his last name wrong, but like Sean Muskov, something like that. He worked with Adrian Peterson when he came back from his ACL. He works, I think they're down in California now. I think they were in Minnesota. But Sean, when he talked to me, I can't find anything out from him. I've gone to his website and stuff like that. But what they do is insane. To me, it's like, how can they make the environment, and they start from the most controlled to the most chaotic environment possible. And like, we think chaotic, like you see Instagram videos where it's like a tennis ball or a react into a color. You know what I mean? Which we've used before. His is literally as a foot is going down, now you're having to react. Even just that slight, simple, where your eyes are going, where auditory signal, whatever it is, that foot moving and doing this, that's where we can get hurt. And so him trying to create that environment, building technology to where he can see their movement in those extremely chaotic environments, that is something that I think we're missing here. I think that we've been trying to implement, but I think that some guys like him are doing, like, some of the examples he talked about, like with Barry Sanders and stuff, to where it's like you're running completely full speed and there's 3 different things that move, not one, 3 different things that are going to send you an input to create a different output instantly. You know what I mean? That fast. Not, hey, we're going to go right or left, where you got 2 choices, or hey, you're only shuffling, or you're only doing this, So I think if there's ways that we can figure out how to create those and put those environments in our controlled environment, that's where I think that we need to go too. You know what I mean? And sport is the best way to do that.
Yep.
But again, how do we train them to get ready for that sport? So how can we try to get to that environment as close as possible? And I think people think that they're doing it, including myself. But I've seen, to create an extremely chaotic environment that you're actually going to see in a game, is extremely hard to do. Like, might not even be possible, to be honest with you,
Yeah, super tough. You bring a ton of good points there, and I think, the better that we, even just making more of an attempt to try to create that game-like environment or some of those scenarios is extremely important. I think what it starts with, and I honestly think as a staff we're really good at it, but, you need to understand the demands of the athlete from the sports side of things. And, that's where, obviously we go out in the community to try to support the athletes, but we're also watching, the demands of a soccer player, watching the demands of a basketball player. How do they move? What are
how many pitches
the typical movement? Right, exactly. All of those different things. And I think taking that into account, that falls under the responsibility of the performance coach or the rehab professional, whoever it is, when you're designing a program or implementing training in any way. And we're doing that part of things already, but it's just like you said, what can we do in the environment that we have here to take the next level up? And I think that's where we're constantly trying to get a little bit better, get a little bit more of an edge.
I think what you said there too, where we understand the demands, but also where the athlete, I think that one of the biggest things that we've changed now is the education and the understanding our athletes have, why they're actually doing their training. And I feel I still get groups to where it's I'm teaching them the right movement. I think I got the best program, and I'm trying to rip through it. But it's do they really know why? Are they understanding why this is going to have a transfer to their sport? To me, when they do know that why, that intent is through the roof, right? Like Coach Kulig talked to us, the whole group, about a couple weeks ago. That why is huge, and I don't think it's just for the weight room, but I think it's okay, this is what why we're doing something, why it's going to transfer to my sport. When I'm in my sport, okay, when you feel something not go the right way, okay, now I get, on the performance side of things. Or when I'm doing stuff on my own, oh, this is why I'm doing that. We have kids that I've had for long enough, like Davis Thacker, just over there, He's had a plethora of rough injuries, to where it's his toe, his Achilles, AC joints in his shoulder, where it's all working together, where Davis could probably take some of our kids through workouts better than a lot of other green trainers and performance coaches like us, because of how well educated he is. He knows how the weekly split is. He knows how the block is. He knows when he needs to deload. We have high school kids that do the same thing, and I think that education for the ones that get that, same thing on the ACL, you know what I mean? Yep. And I think even just talking about it out loud right now, we need to reinforce that why on our injury guys. And really with every athlete, because we want to treat it like training, right? The return to play process. But I think if they know that why and putting everything together, I think it's just their intent is going to go through the roof. And then their education, to where our goal should be just guiding them through the session, not to where it's a constant, we're yelling every single session, right? You know what I mean? Like I've talked about before, the CVI men's basketball team. We've been with them for a long time. We've been in the Final Four a bunch of times, won a national championship. This last year, really the last 2 years, it's been I've had all the guys. I feel like I need to yell and coach and do all this, and now it's I barely even have to speak. You know what I mean? And I almost feel insecure about it. Like a coach, oh, my job's to be here, and I'm they don't think I'm doing enough. But really now, sitting back and watching them just rip it on their own and have the intent, know when to switch the weights, know when, they know their plan Bs. Okay, I shouldn't be in this front rack position. This one's not. They're not hustling me, taking an easier route. But those kids that know that movement, the results go through the roof.
Yeah, for sure. Something else I thought of too, just listening to you saying that, and this goes a little bit back to the rehab side of things with an ACL, but I think one of our responsibilities as well as a professional that understands the demands of this sport and what an athlete's going to go back into, we realize that in this setting there's only so many things that we can provide to create that chaotic environment. And every single step you take is going to get a little bit more advanced, right? So training in here, even if it's a controlled environment where we're working on something reactive and they're getting a true agility stimulus, that's going to be different than an individual period at practice, which is going to be different than a 7-on if we look at football, or a full 11-on-11 type drill, or any plays that way, which is then going to heighten when they go into a game. So I think, honestly, and this is where just communicating with like parents. I've got one right now, and she's awesome about, talking to me. Hey, what do you think about doing things outside of here from a soccer skill standpoint?
Love it. what
What do you think about when we reintegrate back into practice? And it's like, this is what I learned from the Colts. Once someone gets cleared to go back into play, it's not 100% floodgates open. Okay, you're back, right? It's like, okay, this is your first day back to practice. We might do 50%, 25% of the individual reps. So you're going through dynamic warm-up, you're going through half of the indie work, and that's it. You're shut down. See how the knee responds, see how the athlete feels the next day, and then continue to build load on the athlete over time. And I think that's where we miss the box a little bit on some of the youth athletes. It's like, okay, perfect. You hit the 7.5 or the 9-month mark, whatever it is, you tested appropriately on your biodex, cool, go back. And now it's like people get lost a little bit. You get thrown into the deep end, and there's a lot of different moving parts. So it's like, if we could have a little bit of input on kind of how we progress people back into the practice setting, back into the game setting, and do some sort of load management going into it, I think that would solve a lot of issues as well. Like, we don't want to see the re-tear rates that are out there in youth athletes, and we're trying to have an impact that way.
Yeah, and we failed too. We just keep learning. Yeah. Hey guys, I want to take a quick break and thank our first sponsor, Bateman Builders, aka my dad. With 30 years of experience, now specializing in remodels and decking, he can pretty much do anything. So if you have something around the house, hit him up. He has built and installed everything here at OTF for the last 12 years. Can't thank him enough for his sponsorship. You can find him on Facebook and at 208-353-1247. Thank you, Bateman Builders, and let's get back to the show. Your dream in the performance side, or with this and with where you're going with OTF. What's our long-term dream? What do you want it to look like for you, as far as, because I know you came from the rehab side of things.
I hate to say that it's like ever evolving. I think we're on the path that I want to see already. For myself, it's like there's so many areas of performance that I want to get better at, right? And I look at some of the coaches on our staff, like Wyatt is an example. Like, Wyatt crushes it every single day. That guy is learning every single day. Like, I want to be the performance coach that he is. And then I look at other people on the rehab side of things that are so far advanced in the knowledge and the capabilities and have touched things that I haven't even discovered yet. It's like, how can I continue to branch off on the performance side of things and truly understand athlete performance, understand movement, be able to dissect it a little bit better, know the drill work or the specific things that we're going to implement from a training standpoint to help on the performance side of things, but also have just as much of an impact on the rehab and the kind of the medical side of things. And obviously that's a very broad kind of spectrum, but I think there's so much room for growth right now, and we're kind of already taking the steps towards getting where we want to be. And I know you and I share kind of a similar vision, but it's like, how can we be the one-stop shop where people don't even have to think about going to get anything else, right? We're involved in the physician that is going to see them. We're involved in the rehab that they might have, whether it's surgical or non-surgical. We're involved in the training, whether it's in-season, off-season, like year-round. How can we have the biggest impact on athlete performance start to finish, and we retain these kids from the time that they're young up through high school, hopefully through a college career. And, I honestly think even already with like the help that you provide these guys in various levels of professional sports, like, it's unreal, right? And I think there's so much room for growth there. Like, everyone loves coming to Boise already. I don't see why it can't be a destination where people want to come in the off season.
Yeah.
Something like Exos has built in some of those other facilities that have done it. Like, I see us going there, and that's kind of where I want to go.
Well, let's make it happen, man.
For sure.
I'm amped, dude. I think, it's awesome. And it's also, it's a pressure at the same time, because we also, I want to execute what we have right now. You know what I mean? Don't want to look too far ahead, but that's where we're going, and that's why we're trying to push it, man. Couldn't be luckier to have you on, and the juice you bring. We didn't talk about it much, but the energy you bring in here, man, it's next level, bro. And I appreciate everything, man.
For sure. Appreciate you.
Thanks, brother.
You bet.